Chapter 1: The Invisible and the Glass. The concrete scraped Grace's spine through the thin fabric of her dress. She shifted against the wall, but the rough surface offered no comfort, only the unyielding fact of itself. Diesel smoke clung to her throat. Traffic roared past in waves, a river of metal and noise that never stopped, never noticed. Her palm rested on the swell of her belly. The baby kicked, a flutter, then stillness. She opened her eyes, stared at the cardboard square in front of her. 3 coins. Copper. Worthless except in their small accumulation. The canvas bag sat wedged between her hip and the wall. Inside, the textbook pressed against her side, its corners digging in. She reached for it without thinking, fingers finding the cracked spine, tracing the ridge where the binding had split and been mended with tape. The tape was yellowed now, peeling at the edges. Advanced accounting principles. A path to professional excellence, she whispered numbers under her breath. Debit inventory, credit accounts payable, debit cash, credit revenue. The rhythm steadied her, a private incantation. The formulas were clean, absolute. They didn't care that her dress was torn at the hem or that her last meal had been yesterday's leftover rice from a sympathetic vendor. A cluster of schoolchildren rounded the corner, their uniforms crisp, their laughter sharp. One pointed, another giggled. Grace didn't lift her head, but her jaw locked. She pulled the textbook closer, turned it inward so the cover faced her chest. Look at her. Is she sleeping? My mother says not to stare. Their voices faded into the traffic. Grace exhaled slowly, counted to 10, then opened the book. The pages were soft from use, margins filled with her own handwriting, notes from lectures she'd attended in another life. Her professor's voice echoed in her memory. Precision is integrity. Every entry tells the truth. She'd believed that once. The sun dropped lower, painting the sky in shades of rust and ash. Shadows stretched across the pavement. Grace closed the book, slid it back into the bag, and pulled her knees up as far as her belly allowed. The baby kicked again. She pressed her hand there, felt the movement beneath her skin. A woman passed, dropped a coin onto the cardboard without slowing. Grace watched it roll, settle beside the others. 4 now. The air grew cooler. She wrapped her arms around herself, tucking her chin down. The street didn't care, the city didn't care, but the textbook was still there, wedged against her ribs, and the numbers still made sense when nothing else did. She closed her eyes and whispered again. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. The formula held. The streetlights flickered on in sequence, casting orange pools across the pavement. Traffic had thinned to a steady pulse rather than a roar. The air shifted grilled meat from the vendor stall 2 corners down, the metallic promise of rain gathering somewhere beyond the skyline. James walked past without breaking stride, phone in hand, thumb scrolling through messages. The firm. Always the firm. Francis had sent 3 updates in the last hour, each one more urgent than the last. He barely registered the figure against the wall. Then something snagged his peripheral vision. A detail. The spine of a book, the familiar typeface. Advanced accounting principles. He stopped mid-step, turned back. The woman sat with the book pressed to her chest, one hand resting on a swollen belly. Her dress was torn at the hem, faded to near colorlessness, but her posture held something that didn't match the cardboard square at her feet or the few coins scattered there. She wasn't slumped, she was contained. Grace felt the shift before she saw him. The air changed when someone stopped instead of passing. She looked up. His suit was pristine despite the heat. The watch on his wrist caught the streetlight, understated, expensive. His eyes settled on her with the kind of focus that made her spine straighten instinctively. Not pity, something closer to assessment. James knelt, his tailored trousers creasing at the knee. What's your name? Grace's fingers tightened on the textbook. Grace, Neka Obi. How long have you been out here? Her voice came steady but thin, the sound of vocal cords that hadn't been used much lately. Long enough. James glanced at the book. You've read that twice? She met his gaze, didn't look away. Numbers make sense. The world stopped making sense, but numbers still do. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. You were a student. I was going to be an accountant. The past tense sat heavy between them. James straightened, reached into his jacket, pulled out a card. There's a restaurant 3 blocks north. Go there tonight. Tell them I sent you. They'll give you a meal and a room. Grace stared at the card. Crescent and Crown Financial, CEO, James Olumide Bilogun. The embossed lettering caught the light. No strings, he said. Just food and rest. If you want more than that, if you're interested, come to the firm tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. She took the card. Her fingers brushed his palm, calloused against smooth. Every instinct she'd learned on the street screamed that kindness had a price, that offers came with hooks buried in their flesh. But her body was failing. The baby needed more than her pride could provide. I'll come, she said. James stood, adjusted his cuffs. 2 o'clock. Don't be late. He walked away without looking back. Grace watched until he disappeared into the crowd, then looked down at the card in her hand. The rain began to fall, fat drops that darkened the concrete and made the coins on her cardboard gleam. The tower rose like a shard of ice against the afternoon sky. Grace stood on the pavement outside Crescent and Crown Financial, one hand pressed to her belly, the other clutching James's card. The building's glass facade reflected clouds and traffic in equal measure, a perfect mirror that made the world seem cleaner than it was. She pushed through the revolving door. The lobby opened up around her, white marble underfoot, polished to a gloss that caught every footstep. LED panels burned overhead with surgical brightness. A security desk commanded the center of the space, flanked by potted palms that looked too green to be real. Beyond the windows, Legos sprawled in all directions, the skyline sharp and indifferent. The air tasted different here, leather, coffee, something chemical and clean that made her lungs feel small. A guard looked up from his monitor. His uniform was crisp, his expression neutral until his eyes traveled from her face down to her worn shoes and back up again. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Your business? Grace held out the card. James Belogan asked me to come. The guard took it, turned it over in his fingers, glanced at his colleague. A beat of silence stretched between them. Then he picked up the phone, dialed, spoke in a low voice she couldn't quite hear. 2 minutes. She counted them by the pulse in her wrist. The elevator chimed. A woman stepped out, medium build, professional hairstyle, makeup applied with precision. Her pencil skirt and blouse were immaculate. She carried an ID tablet in one hand and moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of navigating these corridors. Grace Obi. The woman's voice was warm, despite the formality. I'm Ada Aze, Mr. Belogan's assistant. Please, come with me. Ada's eyes met hers, not with pity, but with something closer to recognition, as if she understood what it cost to walk through those doors. They moved through hallways lined with glass walls. Grace could see into offices where people sat before gleaming laptops, their faces lit by screens, their movements purposeful. Conversations happened in low, urgent tones. A woman in a navy suit strode past without looking up from her phone. A man carried a stack of files bound in leather covers. Grace felt the weight of eyes on her, brief glances from people who registered her presence and dismissed it in the same breath. She was both invisible and exposed, a stain on the pristine marble. Ada led her into a waiting area, soft chairs, a low table, windows that framed the city like a painting. Would you like something to eat? Ada gestured toward a small kitchenette. Tea? Water? Grace's throat tightened. Water, please. Ada returned with a tray, a sandwich wrapped in paper, fresh mango slices, a bottle of water, a cup of tea that steamed gently. She set it down without ceremony. Take your time. Grace ate slowly. The sandwich was real meat, fresh bread. The mango tasted like something she'd forgotten existed. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the water bottle, and she forced herself to breathe through it, to not betray how close to breaking she was. The door opened. James emerged from his office, the same tailored presence from the street but sharper here, in his natural habitat. He crossed the room and sat across from her, his posture open. How did you sleep? Better than I have in months. Good. He leaned forward slightly. Grace, I want to offer you something. Not charity. A job. On merit. But I need to know what you can do. His eyes held hers. Can you prove to me what you know about accounting? Grace set down the water bottle. Her voice came quiet but steady, the first solid ground she'd felt in a long time. Give me numbers. I will show you. The conference room smelled of leather and cold coffee. Late afternoon light slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the polished table into a mirror that reflected harsh LED panels overhead. James sat at the head, his fingers steepled, watching Adekunle Okafor across from him. The CFO's tie was loosened. his forehead damp despite the air conditioning. This discrepancy, Adekunle said, his voice tight, it puts my entire audit at risk. My reputation, your firm's credibility. Francis hunched over a laptop, his jaw working as he scrolled through columns of numbers. Beside him, Tunde, a junior associate barely out of university, flipped through printed ledgers with increasing desperation. Papers covered the table in overlapping waves, balance sheets, transaction logs, reconciliation reports. We will find it, Francis said. His voice carried an edge. I have overseen this account personally for 3 years. There has never been an error of this magnitude. James glanced at him but said nothing. Grace stood near the back wall, her hands folded over her belly. She had been told to wait in case they needed files retrieved or copies made. A runner, a clerk, someone to be forgotten the moment the crisis passed. But her eyes moved across the documents spread before her. Numbers had always spoken to her in rhythms, patterns that most people missed, harmonies buried in rows and columns. She could see the shape of a ledger the way some people heard music, each entry a note, each balance a chord that either resolved or jarred. This one jarred. Her gaze snagged on 2 lines in the middle section of the printed report Tunde had abandoned. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. Excuse me. The room went still. Francis looked up, his expression hardening. James turned toward her. There is a duplicated entry, Grace said, line 47 and line 52. Same transaction, same amount, but line 52 is offset 1 column to the right. That is why the balance does not reconcile. Francis's face tightened. That is impossible. I verified, check it, James said. Tunde pulled up the file on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The silence stretched, then his eyes widened. She is right. Line 52. It is the same entry as line 47, but shifted 1 cell. The phantom balance is 2.3 million naira. Francis stared at the screen, his knuckles white against the table edge. Adekunle exhaled, the sound ragged with relief. Delete the duplicate entry and the ledger balances. Perfectly, Tunde confirmed. Adekunle stood, shaking James's hand with both of his. You have saved my company from catastrophe. Thank you. James walked him to the door, exchanged a few quiet words, then returned as the room emptied. Francis lingered near the table, his eyes fixed on the corrected ledger. Tunde gathered papers and left without meeting anyone's gaze. James turned to Grace. How did you see it so quickly? Numbers have a rhythm, she said. When the rhythm is broken, I can hear it. Accounting is not just precision, it is also pattern recognition. She paused. I have always been good at listening to patterns. James studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if confirming something he had already decided. I am offering you a full-time position, junior accountant, starting immediately. His voice was steady, businesslike. I will also arrange housing for you, a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, safe, dignified, and I will support you through your pregnancy and the birth of your child. Grace's throat closed. She forced herself to breathe. Yes. James extended his hand. She took it. Behind them, Francis remained at the table, staring at the empty chair where Grace had stood. His jaw worked, his eyes narrowed, something cold and hard settled into the lines of his face. Chapter 2. The Price of Recognition. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. Grace stood in the center of the single bedroom, her hand resting on her belly, and allowed herself to breathe. A narrow bed with crisp white sheets, a small wooden table beneath a window that overlooked a street lined with flame trees, a kitchen with a functioning stove and a refrigerator that hummed softly. She set her accounting textbook on the table, its worn cover incongruous against the clean surface. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and wept, silently, for 10 minutes. The next morning, she arrived at Crescent and Crown 15 minutes early. Her workstation sat between Ada's administrative desk and the main accounting cluster, a low glass partition separating her from the hum of conversation and the click of keyboards. The desk held a computer, a stack of manila folders, and a nameplate that read Grace Obi, Junior Accountant. She touched the nameplate once, then opened the first file. By mid-morning, Ada appeared with a cup of tea and a small plate of chin-chin. You need to eat, Ada said. And the tea is rooibos, no caffeine, better for the baby. Grace looked up, surprised. Thank you. Ada set the plate down and leaned against the partition. A few things you should know. Francis does not like surprises. He expects reports formatted exactly as he prefers, margins, fonts, everything. Tunde is harmless but forgetful. If he asks you to verify something, verify it twice. And Mr. Belogan notices everything, even when he seems distracted. Grace nodded, committing each detail to memory. And one more thing, Ada said, her voice quieter. You belong here. Do not let anyone make you feel otherwise. The files Grace received were routine reconciliation logs, expense verifications, ledger cross-checks, tasks designed for someone learning the rhythms of the firm. But Grace worked through them with absolute precision, her pen marking small discrepancies in the margins. A transposed digit here, a misallocated account code there. She flagged each error in her work logs without announcement, simply correcting and moving forward. By Wednesday, Tunde stopped at her desk. You caught that vendor duplication in the Okafor file last week, he said, and now you have found 3 more errors in the quarterly reconciliations. How? I read carefully, Grace said. Tunde nodded, something like respect flickering across his face. Keep it up. Across the room, Francis watched from his desk. His eyes followed her movements, his expression unreadable. On Thursday afternoon, James emerged from his office and paused at Grace's workstation. The floor had mostly emptied for lunch. How are you settling in? Grace set down her pen. The work is manageable. The apartment is more than I expected. Thank you. James studied her for a moment. And how are you? She hesitated, then met his gaze. For the first time in many months, I feel like a person again. Not invisible, not erased. Present, capable. James nodded slowly. You are both of those things, and more. He glanced at the stack of corrected files on her desk, then back at her. If you need anything, if the workload becomes too much, or if you need adjustments for your comfort, tell Ada. She will make it happen. I will. By Friday, the shift was tangible. Colleagues who had avoided eye contact now offered brief nods as they passed her desk. Someone left a small potted plant on her partition with a note. Welcome to the team. Grace watered the plant and returned to her work, her hands steady, her focus absolute. She was no longer the woman from the street, she was the accountant who caught what others missed. The Zenith Minerals file landed on Grace's desk on a Monday morning, its weight both literal and symbolic. 3 binders of transaction records, spreadsheets documenting mineral exports across 4 continents, and a tight deadline that would require late nights and precision work. James stood beside her desk as she opened the first binder. This is a significant client, he said. Their internal auditors are thorough. Any errors will reflect on the firm. I understand. Francis will supervise. He has the institutional knowledge, but the analytical work is yours. Grace nodded, already scanning the first page of entries. James hesitated, then added, You have proven yourself capable. This is your opportunity to demonstrate that capability at scale. After he left, Francis appeared at her partition. His expression was neutral, professional. We will meet every morning at 9 to review progress, he said. I expect documentation of all findings cross-referenced and formatted according to firm standards. No shortcuts. Of course, Francis's eyes lingered on her belly for a moment before he returned to his desk. The work consumed her. Grace cross-referenced export manifests against payment records, verified signatures on transfer documents, and traced cash flows through subsidiary accounts. The complexity was exhilarating, each transaction a puzzle piece that fit into a larger picture of global commerce. She worked past sunset most evenings, her back aching, her feet swollen. Ada brought her food and reminded her to rest, but Grace pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that this audit could cement her place at the firm. By the end of the first week, she had completed the preliminary reconciliation and flagged 12 discrepancies for further investigation. She documented each finding in a detailed report and submitted it to Francis. He reviewed her work without comment, then filed it in the shared project folder. What Grace did not see was the careful precision with which Francis opened her digital files later that evening. He shifted a decimal point in transaction 4A-7, moving $2.3 million to $23 million. He duplicated entry 9C-12, creating a phantom payment that would appear as careless redundancy. He altered a date on document 15B, making a legitimate transfer seem suspiciously timed. Each change was small. Each was designed to survive a casual review, but collapse under scrutiny. Francis worked methodically, his jaw tight, his movements deliberate. He was not destroying her work outright, that would be too obvious. He was undermining it, creating the appearance of incompetence through small, insidious errors that would seem like Grace's own carelessness. When he finished, he closed the files and cleared his browser history. Grace continued her work, unaware that the ground beneath her was shifting. On Thursday evening, James knocked on her partition. "It is late," he said. "Come, we will eat in my office." She followed him to the corner suite where Ada had arranged a simple meal: jollof rice, grilled chicken, and plantains. They sat across from each other at the small table near the window. "How is the audit progressing?" "Complex but manageable," Grace said. "The transaction chains are intricate, but the logic is sound." James studied her. "And how are you?" She set down her fork, tired, but satisfied. "This work matters." "It does. And so do you." The words hung between them, weighted with something unspoken. Grace looked down at her plate, her pulse quickening. "I have been thinking," James said quietly, "about what comes next. For you, for the baby." "I have been thinking about that too. You are building something here, a career, a life. I want you to know that you have support, whatever you need." Grace met his eyes. "I know. And I am grateful." The silence that followed was comfortable, intimate. Something had shifted between them, a recognition that their connection extended beyond employer and employee. Across the office, Ada locked her desk and prepared to leave. She glanced toward James's office, saw the two figures silhouetted against the window, and allowed herself a small smile. Then she looked toward Francis's desk where the light still glowed. Her smile faded. She made a mental note to watch him more carefully. James set down his coffee, the ceramic meeting the desk without sound. The morning had begun calmly, emails answered, contracts reviewed, the city below waking in its usual rhythm. Then Ada knocked. "Mr. Balogan, Chioma Adeyemi from Zenith Minerals is here. She says it's urgent." James stood. "Send her in." Chioma entered with the controlled fury of someone accustomed to boardroom battles. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed, her briefcase hitting the desk with deliberate force. "James." "No greeting, no preamble. Your firm just handed us a disaster." "I don't understand." "The Zenith audit. Our internal team flagged it yesterday. Duplicated entries, misplaced decimals, transaction dates that don't align with our records." She pulled a folder from her briefcase and spread printouts across his desk. "This isn't carelessness. This looks deliberate." James scanned the pages, his jaw tightening. "We trusted Crescent and Crown," Chioma continued. "Our board is questioning whether to terminate the contract entirely. If word gets out that your audit contained fraudulent data in a stop." James raised his hand. "Give me one moment." He pressed the intercom. "Ada, send Grace to my office immediately." Grace arrived within minutes, her expression shifting from concern to confusion as she saw Chioma's face. "Grace, open the Zenith files. Show me transaction 4A7. She moved to his computer, her fingers steady on the keyboard despite the tension crackling through the room. The file loaded. Her breath caught. "This is wrong. Explain. This entry shows 23 million. I recorded 2.3 million. I verified it against the source document twice." Her voice remained level, but strain threaded through each word. "And this," as she clicked to another screen, "this transaction wasn't in the original ledger at all. Someone added it." James watched her face. No panic, no deflection, only the precise clarity of someone confronting an impossible contradiction. He believed her. "Chioma," he said, turning to the Zenith representative, "Crescent and Crown will conduct an immediate internal investigation. I will personally oversee a corrected audit. You will have accurate numbers within 48 hours." James, 48 hours. You have my word. Chioma studied him, then gathered her papers. "I'll inform the board, but if this happens again, it won't." After she left, James closed the door. Grace remained at the computer, scrolling through files with methodical intensity. "Here," she said quietly, "entry 9C-12 is duplicated, and this date on document 15B. I entered March 7th. It now reads March 17th. James leaned over her shoulder, examining the screen. The pattern emerged quickly, small alterations, each one subtle enough to escape casual notice, but catastrophic in aggregate. "Someone with system access did this," Grace said. "Someone who knew the audit structure and my workflow." James's expression hardened into something cold and precise. Francis. The thought arrived with the weight of certainty, but he needed proof before acting. Ada, he called through the intercom. Come in, please. She appeared in the doorway. Work with grace. Pull the backup versions of these files from the server. Document every alteration, time terms, user logs, everything. Ada nodded, her face serious, and Ada James met her eyes. This stays between us until we have answers. Ada set the final printout on James's desk. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Files covered every surface, originals, backups, access logs arranged in precise rows. The timestamps don't lie, Ada said. Francis accessed the Zenith files on 3 separate occasions after Grace completed her work. Each time, he made alterations. Small ones, deliberate. Grace stood near the window, her arms crossed. She'd spent the last 2 hours watching Ada reconstruct the digital trail, each piece of evidence tightening the noose. James studied the documents. The pattern was unmistakable. Francis's user ID, his login times, the specific files he'd opened. No room for coincidence. Call him in. Ada left. Grace remained, her posture rigid. You should stay, James said. You have the right to hear this. I'd rather not. Grace, I know what he'll say, that I don't belong here, that I took something from him. She turned from the window. Maybe it's easier if I'm not in the room when he says it. You're not going anywhere. Francis arrived 3 minutes later. His shirt was crisp, his expression neutral, but his shoulders carried tension like armor. James, you wanted to see me. Sit down. Francis took the chair across from the desk. His eyes flicked to Grace, then back to James. We've completed the internal investigation into the Zenith audit discrepancies. James pushed the first file across the desk. Your access logs, March 9th, 11:40 p.m. You opened Grace's completed audit files. Francis glanced at the document. I was reviewing her work. That's my job as senior accountant. March 10th, 2:15 a.m. You accessed the files again. This time, you altered transaction 4A to 7, changing the decimal placement. That's not March 11th, 9:30 p.m. You duplicated entry 9C-12 and modified the date on document 15B. James's voice remained level, surgical. We have the backup versions. We have your edits. We have the timestamps. Francis's jaw tightened. The professional mask began to crack. She doesn't deserve this, he said quietly. Excuse me, Grace. Francis's voice rose. She walks in off the street, pregnant, homeless, and suddenly she's the golden child? I've given this firm 18 years. 18 years of late nights and missed family dinners and sacrificed weekends, and you hand her a desk and an apartment and your personal attention like she's earned any of it. She solved the Okafor crisis in 20 minutes. I would have found that error eventually, but you didn't. James stood, Grace did, and instead of accepting that reality, you tried to destroy her credibility. You sabotaged client work. You endangered this firm's reputation. Francis rose from his chair. She's an outsider. She has no right to the resources you've given her, no right to displace people who've actually built something here. Loyalty built on resentment isn't loyalty. James's voice turned cold. It's betrayal. You're fired. Vacate your office within the hour. Francis stared at him. The fury in his eyes crystallized into something harder, more focused. This isn't over. He walked to the door, then stopped. His gaze found Grace standing silent near the window. The look he gave her carried weight, not just anger but promise. A threat delivered without words. Grace's hand moved to her belly, protective, instinctive. Francis left. Ada appeared in the doorway moments later. She'd seen the exchange. Grace, she said quietly, I'm calling security. They need to know Francis is no longer authorized in the building, and I'm arranging a car service for you. You're not walking home alone tonight. The restaurant occupied a quiet corner 2 blocks from the firm. Soft amber lighting warmed the walls, and the murmur of other diners created a gentle backdrop. The scent of grilled fish and palm wine drifted from nearby tables. Grace sat across from James, her hands folded in her lap. She'd changed into a simple dress Ada had helped her select, modest, dark blue, respectful. The pregnancy showed more clearly now, a visible curve beneath the fabric. James poured water into her glass. I wanted to apologize. For what? For Francis. For not seeing what he was capable of earlier. He set the pitcher down. You came here looking for safety and opportunity. Instead, you walked into a situation where someone actively tried to destroy your work. You didn't create that situation. I enabled it. I kept Francis in a position of power long after I should have questioned his judgment. James leaned back. Your position at the firm is secure, more than secure. Your integrity and skill have already changed how we operate. I need you to know that. Grace looked at her hands. I expected exploitation when I came here, or conditional kindness, help that would evaporate the moment I stopped being useful. I didn't expect respect. You've earned respect. Have I? She met his eyes. Or did you decide I was worth it before I proved anything? James considered the question. Both. I saw potential in you, but you've exceeded every expectation I had. The waiter arrived with their food: jollof rice, plantains, grilled tilapia, arranged with careful precision. Grace ate slowly, savoring each bite. The apartment, she said quietly. The medical care. The job. You didn't have to provide any of it. I wanted to. Why? James set down his fork. Because you reminded me what this work is supposed to be about, not just numbers and clients and quarterly reports. Building something that matters, creating opportunities for people who deserve them. Grace's hand moved to her belly. The baby shifted beneath her palm. I've been afraid, she said. Afraid of losing what I've regained. Afraid that all of this is temporary, that one mistake will send me back to the street. That won't happen. You can't promise that. I can. James reached across the table. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. Grace, I want you to consider staying at the firm not just as an employee, as a partner, someone who helps build what comes next. She stared at their joined hands. And I want to be part of your life, yours and your child's, if you'll allow it. The restaurant noise faded to background static. Grace's throat tightened. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. I'm afraid of being disappointed, of trusting, and then, I know. James's thumb traced the back of her hand. I'm asking you to try anyway, to trust, build something together, to risk. Grace closed her eyes. The baby kicked, a small flutter against her ribs. I want to, she said finally. I want to try. Then we will. What if I fail? You won't. But if you stumble, I'll be there. I promise you that. Every resource I have, every protection I can offer, it's yours. Grace opened her eyes. James's expression held no doubt, no reservation, just quiet certainty. She turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together. They sat in comfortable silence. The restaurant continued around them, other conversations, the clink of glasses, the soft shuffle of waiters. But at their tables, something had shifted. A threshold crossed into territory neither of them had mapped yet. Grace squeezed his hand once. James squeezed back. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and new life. Soft light filtered through gauze curtains, casting gentle shadows across the tile floor. Medical equipment beeped a steady rhythm, reassuring, mechanical heartbeats that marked time in precise increments. Grace lay against white pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes held something fierce and luminous as she gazed at the small bundle in her arms. The baby was perfect. Impossibly small, with dark eyes that blinked slowly and a rosebud mouth that worked soundlessly. Her tiny fists curled against the hospital blanket, and when Grace touched one with her finger, the baby's hand opened and closed around it. James stood beside the bed, his hand still resting on Grace's shoulder. His other hand touched the baby's head, so light, barely more than a whisper of contact. She has your eyes, he said. Grace's laugh came out watery. She has your chin. Look at it. Stubborn already. Good. She'll need that. The delivery had lasted 6 hours. Grace had gripped James's hand through each contraction, her nails leaving crescents in his palm. He'd whispered encouragement between breaths. You're strong. You're doing this. Almost there. When the doctor asked if he wanted to cut the cord, James had nodded. His hands shook as he took the scissors, but the cut was clean and decisive. Then the baby was in Grace's arms, and the room dissolved into sound crying, laughter, the rustle of nurses moving with practiced efficiency. Now, in the quiet aftermath, Grace couldn't stop the tears. They slid down her cheeks, warm and relentless. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't apologize. James knelt beside the bed. His lips brushed her forehead, then the baby's. Grace, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I am honored, ready not to tolerate. I'm sorry. Yes. Don't apologize. James knelt beside the bed. His lips brushed her forehead, then the baby's. Grace, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I am honored to be the father of your child. Grace's breath hitched. James, I mean it, every word. The baby made a small sound halfway between a sigh and a whimper. Grace adjusted her hold, bringing the child closer to her chest. What should we call her? James asked. Grace had thought about this for weeks, testing names in her mind like equations. But now, looking at her daughter's face, only one felt right. Joy, she said. Joy Olumide Balogun. James went still. Olumide, your name, your lineage. She deserves both of us. Grace, don't argue with me. I'm too tired to fight. James laughed, the sound rough with emotion. I wouldn't dare. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ada stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of white lilies and yellow roses. Her eyes were already wet. Oh, she breathed. Oh, Grace. She crossed the room and set the flowers on the bedside table. Then she bent down and embraced Grace carefully, mindful of the baby between them. She's beautiful, Ada whispered. Perfect. Thank you. For everything. For being here. Ada straightened and wiped her eyes. I wouldn't have missed this. Not for anything. She leaned over the baby, her expression softening into something maternal and protective. Hello, little one. Welcome to the world. You have no idea how many people have been waiting for you. Joy's eyes drifted shut. Her breathing evened into the shallow rhythm of infant sleep. James moved closer, wrapping his arms around both Grace and the baby. Grace leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back. The room narrowed, the hospital sounds faded. Ada's presence became a gentle background hum. For this moment, nothing existed beyond the three of them: mother, father, daughter. A family forged from desperation and choice, from survival and stubborn hope. Grace closed her eyes and let herself rest. The bar smelled of stale beer and fried plantain. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly yellow pools across scarred wooden tables. Men hunched over drinks, their voices low and bitter, discussing contracts that fell through and bosses who didn't pay. Francis sat in the corner booth, his third whiskey half finished. His tie hung loose around his neck, the knot pulled down to his sternum. His shirt was wrinkled. He'd worn it 2 days running. 6 weeks since James fired him, 6 weeks of rejection emails and closed doors. The recruiters who used to return his calls now went silent. His reputation had been destroyed with surgical precision. He lifted the glass and drained it. The burn felt good. Cleansing. Another, he called to the bartender. The man behind the counter nodded and poured. Francis watched the amber liquid splash into the glass, remembering the way James had looked at him in that final meeting. Not angry, disappointed. You endangered everything we built together. Francis's jaw tightened. Everything they built. As if James hadn't spent 20 years relying on Francis's labor, Francis's loyalty, Francis's willingness to work weekends and holidays while James took credit. And now Grace, the homeless woman who stumbled in off the street and took everything Francis had earned. She doesn't even belong there, Francis muttered. The man in the next booth looked over. He was younger than Francis, maybe early 30s, with a sharp face and calculating eyes, gold chain visible at his collar, expensive watch on his wrist. Talking to yourself, the man asked, talking to anyone who'll listen. The man smiled. What's the story? Francis shouldn't have answered, but the whiskey had loosened something inside him and the words came spilling out. James, Grace, the partnership she'd been offered, the baby she'd had, the life she was building on Francis's broken back. The man listened without interrupting. When Francis finished, he slid out of his booth and moved to Francis's table. Ikechukwu, he said, extending his hand. Francis shook it. Francis. Ikechukwu sat down. Sounds like you got screwed. That's one way to put it. You want to do something about it? Francis's pulse quickened. Like what? Ikechukwu leaned back, his expression casual. I know people. People who can make problems disappear, or create new ones. I don't understand, the woman. Grace. She has a baby now, right? Francis nodded slowly. Babies are vulnerable, Ikechukwu said, easy to lose track of. And when something happens to a child, parents fall apart. Businesses suffer. Reputations crumble. The implications settled over Francis like a cold weight. You're talking about kidnapping. I'm talking about leverage. A way to make them feel what you felt. Powerless. Humiliated. Francis should have stood up, should have walked out, but instead he sat there, his mind turning over the possibility. Grace holding her baby, James standing beside her, both of them smiling like they'd won something. How much? Francis asked. Ikechukwu named a figure. Not exorbitant, but enough to sting. And you'd need information, Ikechukwu continued. Where she lives, her schedule, security details. Francis's hands were trembling. He pressed them flat against the table. I know the building, he said. I know her routine. James gave her an apartment in Ikoyi, top floor, security guard at the entrance, but he's lazy, changes shift at 6. Ikechukwu pulled out his phone and started typing. Go on. Francis told him everything. The layout of Grace's apartment, the times she left for work, the fact that Ada sometimes brought groceries on Fridays. When he finished, Ikechukwu pocketed his phone and stood. I'll be in touch, he said. Give me 3 days. Francis watched him leave. The bar seemed quieter now, the other conversations muted and distant. He picked up his glass and finished the whiskey in one swallow. Outside, the city lights blurred through the grimy window. Francis's reflection stared back at him, hollow-eyed, slack-jawed, unrecognizable. He didn't care. Grace heard the knock at 9:10. She was sitting on the sofa, Joy asleep against her chest, a cup of tea cooling on the side table. Her body ached in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her lower back, her pelvis, the tender space between her ribs where exhaustion lived now. She assumed it was Ada. Ada came on Tuesdays with groceries and a quiet, competent way of moving through the apartment that made Grace feel less alone. She shifted Joy carefully to the bassinet in the bedroom, tucked the blanket around her daughter's chin, and padded to the door. The knock came again, louder. Grace opened it without checking the peephole. 3 men in faded blue uniforms stood in the hallway, toolboxes at their feet. One had a clipboard. They looked like they belonged there, or close enough that her sleep-deprived brain didn't register the wrongness, until the door was already swinging inward and a hand, rough and large, was clamping across her mouth. She tried to scream. The sound died in her throat. The man's palm was calloused, smelling of cigarettes and motor oil. His other arm locked around her waist, pinning her arms to her sides. She kicked backward, her heel connecting with his shin, but he didn't flinch, didn't even grunt. The second man was already moving past them, toward the bedroom. Grace's body went rigid. Every muscle, every nerve ending screamed at her to move, to fight, to reach that bedroom before, but the hand tightened over her mouth. She couldn't breathe. Panic flooded her chest, sharp and electric. She heard the sound of the bassinet being lifted, the soft creak of the frame. No, no, no. Grace twisted violently, her postpartum body weak but her instinct pure animal desperation. She drove her elbow backward, felt it connect with ribs. The man grunted, his grip loosening for half a second, and she lunged forward toward the bedroom, toward Joy. A third figure, the one with the clipboard, stepped into her path. His face was cold, unremarkable. He grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. The second man emerged from the bedroom carrying Joy in his arms. Joy was awake now, her mouth open in a confused, plaintive cry. Grace's scream tore out of her, muffled and strangled against the first man's palm. She thrashed, kicked, clawed at the hand covering her mouth, drawing blood, not caring. The pain in her chest was nothing compared to the sight of Joy being carried toward the door, toward the hallway, away. The man with the clipboard raised his hand and struck her across the face. The impact was sharp, deliberate, hard enough to snap her head to the side. Stars bloomed in her vision. For a moment, the world tilted and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but register the absence of her daughter's weight, the silence where Joy's cries should have been. When her vision cleared, they were gone. The apartment door hung open. The hallway was empty. Grace's body crumpled. She hit the floor on her knees, her hands reaching forward, grasping at nothing. The men had already disappeared down the stairs. She was alone. She tried to move, to follow them, but her arms wouldn't obey. Her legs felt like water. She crawled instead, dragging herself toward the sofa, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. That's when she saw it. Her apartment had been torn apart. Drawers hung open, their contents scattered across the floor, cushions overturned, her things scattered, violated, meaningless. It took her nearly 20 minutes to free herself from the duct tape binding her wrists and ankles. Her fingers were numb. She couldn't grip properly, the tape kept slipping. When she finally pulled it away, her skin came with it, raw and burning. She crawled to the bedroom, the bassinet sat empty, the small mattress still warm where Joy had been sleeping. The blanket Grace had tucked around her lay crumpled on the floor. Grace's scream came from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere primal and broken. It filled the apartment, shattered against the walls, poured out through the open door and down the stairwell. A neighbor heard it. Chapter 3. The Law and the Garden. The precinct waiting room smelled of disinfectant and old paperwork. Grace sat rigid in a plastic chair, James on one side, Ada on the other, neither of them speaking. The bruise along Grace's cheekbone had deepened to a dark plum. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. Inspector Ahmed Musa came out to meet them himself, broad-shouldered, trimmed beard, a serviceable jacket over his uniform. He took one look at Grace's face and his jaw tightened. "Come through." His office was sparse filing cabinets, a computer terminal, a window that looked out onto the street below where a hawker was pushing a cart of groundnuts. Photographs of cases covered one wall. A fan on his desk moved warm air in slow circles. Musa set a notepad on the table and pulled a chair close enough that Grace didn't have to raise her voice. "Start from the beginning. Everything you remember," Grace told him. She kept her voice flat the way she'd kept herself flat in the worst months on the street, pulling details back from the panic, naming them like figures in a ledger. Three men. Faded blue uniforms, a clipboard, one with a calloused palm, the smell of motor oil and cigarettes. The second one moving straight for the bedroom without looking anywhere else. The cold, deliberate efficiency of it. "They didn't hesitate," she said. "Nobody hesitates like that in a robbery." They knew where Joy was. They knew the layout, Musa wrote without interrupting. The robbery staging, ransacked drawers, scattered items was theater. Her voice cracked on that word. She steadied herself. "They came for my daughter." James leaned forward. "A man named Francis Nwosu. He was my senior accountant for over a decade. I dismissed him last month for sabotaging a client audit deliberately, with evidence. He made a direct threat toward Grace when he left the office. Not just a threat. Ada's voice was quiet but precise. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they intend to solve. "I have worked with Francis for years." That day he was not angry. He was decided. Musa looked up from his notepad. "Decided," he repeated. "Yes, Mr. Belogan." Musa turned back to James. "You said the building has exterior security cameras?" "4. 2 covering the main entrance, 1 on the car park ramp, 1 on the service access. The footage is stored on our server. I can have it pulled within the hour. I'll send an officer with you to collect it. We do that properly. Chain of custody." He wrote Francis's full name, the date of dismissal, the firm's address. "Any known associates, anyone Francis may have used?" "Not that I'm aware of." James's voice was controlled, but his hand on the desk had formed a fist. "But a man like Francis wouldn't do this himself. He would find someone." Musa nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something confirms what he already suspected. "What you're describing, targeted abduction of an infant with a staged cover, that puts this under federal kidnapping jurisdiction. That means I can move resources faster than a standard case, more personnel, wider reach." He set his pen down and looked directly at Grace. "I want you to know something." Grace met his eyes. "I have worked these cases for 19 years. I know what it looks like when a child is taken for leverage versus taken to disappear. This was leverage, which means your daughter is alive and whoever has her needs her that way." Grace's breath came out slow and unsteady. "We will find her. No performance in it, just wait. You have my word on that." The security footage took 40 minutes to pull and another 20 to review. Musa stood behind his desk officer, arms folded, watching the timestamp roll across the monitor. The camera on the service access had caught them clearly: 3 men in faded blue, a white panel van with a cracked rear light, and Akachukwu walking ahead of the others with Joy bundled against his chest, head covered with a cloth small enough to disappear inside the fold of his arm. "Pause it there." The officer froze the frame. "Plate." Musa leaned in, partial but enough. He straightened and looked at Sergeant Lawal across the room. "Run it. Cross-reference with known associates working the Ago Palace corridor. Start with transport-linked offenders." Lawal was already typing. The registration came back in under an hour. The van was registered to a logistics shell company with 3 outstanding warrants attached to it. From there, the network unfurled fast. Ikechukwu Dike, 41, known for contract intimidation and low-level organized crime. 3 safe houses on record, 2 associates identified from the footage. Musa had uniforms posted at 2 of the safe houses within the hour. The third address, a warehouse on the Badagry Expressway outskirts, had no registered activity, which made it the right one. But he didn't move on it yet. First, Francis. The boarding house was 3 stories of crumbling concrete off a side road near Sur-Roulaire, washing lines between the windows, a generator grinding in the yard. Musa took 2 officers and climbed to the 2nd floor without announcing himself. Francis answered on the 3rd knock. He'd aged a decade in 4 weeks. The neat shirts were gone. He wore a wrinkled polo, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. The apartment behind him smelled of takeaway containers and stale air. "Inspector." Francis kept one hand on the doorframe. "Step back inside." He sat on the edge of the bed. Musa took the only chair. The two officers stood near the door. Bar on Victoria Island 4 weeks ago. Musa set his phone on the table between them. A still from the bar's external camera, Okachukwu's profile clear, Francis beside him. You were there for an hour and 40 minutes. I don't know that man. Your phone pinged a tower 1 block from Grace Obie's apartment building 2 days before the abduction. Musa placed a second image beside the first. You gave him the layout, the routine. Francis looked at the photographs for a long time. The child was not supposed to assure. He stopped himself, finished that sentence very carefully. Francis pressed his hands together between his knees. The room was quiet except for the generator outside. Something behind his face finally buckled. The warehouse. His voice came out stripped of everything. Badagry Road, old textile building, green gate. That's where Ikechukwu takes things he wants to hold. Musa stood. Francis Uchenna Nwosu. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and child endangerment. He nodded to the officer on his left. The handcuffs went on fast. Francis didn't resist. He stood and let them be fitted, jaw clenched, posture still carrying some ghost of the man who'd once run a senior desk at Crescent and Crown. But the fury that crossed his face as they moved him toward the door, impotent, airless, was the face of a man watching everything he'd planned turn entirely against him. Musa called James from the car. We have a location. Badagry Expressway, a warehouse. I'm assembling the extraction unit now. James's voice was tight. How long? 2 hours to stage properly? We go in careful. A rushed entry with an infant present is how things go wrong. A pause on the line. Stay at the station, both of you. When we bring her out, she will need immediate medical evaluation. I need you close, not on the road. The warehouse sat back from the expressway behind a rusted green gate, exactly as Francis had described. A faded sign above the loading bay, Oriole Textiles Limited, had lost half its letters to weather. The building was long and low, metal-sided, the kind of structure that absorbed sound and gave nothing back. Musa arrived 0440. 3 vehicles, lights off, engines killed 200 meters from the gate. 12 officers total. He gathered them at the rear of the lead vehicle, voices low. 2 confirmed inside, possibly 3. 1 infant, non-ambulatory. He tapped the rough sketch Lawal had drawn from satellite imagery. Entry team takes the front-loading door. Second unit holds the rear fire exit. Nobody moves until I give the word. The moment that door breaches, we move fast and we move quiet. The child is the priority, everything else is secondary. Heads nodded, weapons checked. They crossed the yard in near silence, boots finding the soft ground between the gravel. The green gate had been left unlocked, careless or tired. Musa filed that away. The loading bay door gave on the second application of the ram. Metal shrieked against concrete, and then they were inside. A vast, dark space that smelled of rust and old cloth. Pallets stacked against one wall, strip lighting long dead. Torchlight swept in sharp angles, officers fanned wide, each one covering a quadrant. At the back of the warehouse, a partition wall had been thrown up from salvaged boards. Light leaked from beneath a door. Musa was 6 steps from it when it flew open. Ikechukwu came through at a run, joy bundled against his chest, a bag swinging from his other hand. He made it 4 meters before 2 officers stepped from behind the pallet stack and boxed him in from both sides. He stopped. Torch beams converged on his face. Joy's cry split the silence, short, sharp, the pitch of shock rather than pain. Put the child down. Musa's voice carried no elevation, no theatrics. Put her down on the ground in front of you. Do it slowly. Ikachukwu's eyes moved across the room, calculating, cornered. There were officers at every exit. The bag dropped first. Then he crouched, placed Joy on the concrete floor with both hands, and stood with his arms raised, down, knees. He complied. The child welfare officer, a compact woman named Sergeant Bello who had drilled specifically for this, moved past Musa and reached Joy in 3 strides. She lifted the infant with steady hands, brought her close, and spoke softly against her wrapped head. You're all right. You're all right now. Joy cried loud and insistent, which was exactly what an uninjured infant was supposed to do. Bello ran a quick check, airways clear, color normal, no visible trauma. She pressed her radio. Baby is secure. Repeat, baby is secure. No medical emergency evident on preliminary assessment. Musa let out a breath through his nose. Behind him, the second associate was being walked out in cuffs, head low, saying nothing. Ikechukwu was already on his feet and being processed, arms behind his back, rights read flat and clean by the officer securing him. He turned his head once to look at Musa, some residual calculations still running behind his eyes, and Musa held his gaze until the man looked away. Kidnapping, child endangerment, conspiracy. Musa watched them load him into the rear vehicle. Make sure all three charges are listed from the first entry. Bello appeared at his side with Joy, whose crying had softened to a hiccoughing protest. The infant's small fist had closed around the edge of Bello's uniform lapel. Sergeant Bello carried Joy through the hospital's side entrance at just past 6 in the morning, the corridors quiet and bleached white under fluorescent light. Grace was already there, James beside her, both of them still wearing the previous night on their faces. Grace reached for Joy before Bello had fully crossed the room. Let the doctor take her first. James's hand closed gently on Grace's arm. Please, Dr. Funmia Adiola, the attending pediatrician, small, precise, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed up her forehead, to OK Joy to the examination table without ceremony. A social worker, a tall man named Mr. Obi with a clipboard in a quiet manner, positioned himself near the door. Grace stood close enough to touch the table's edge, watching every movement. Adiola worked methodically. Vitals first, temperature, pulse, oxygen, then skin, checking for bruising, abrasion, any mark that shouldn't be there. She tested Joy's reflexes, checked responsiveness with a penlight, pressed gently along the infant's limbs. Joy protested the whole examination with a sustained, vigorous complaint that filled the room. Good lungs. Adiola didn't look up. That's good. 5 minutes. 10. Grace had stopped breathing in any meaningful way. Adiola straightened, removed her glasses. She's physically unharmed. She looked directly at Grace. No signs of injury, no evidence of neglect within the window of her captivity. Her vitals are completely normal. Given the brevity, she paused, deliberate. She was not in their care long enough for the worst outcomes. She's hungry. She needs to feed and sleep. Grace's hand went to her mouth. There may be some stress response over coming weeks, disrupted sleep, fussiness. Infants are more resilient than we give them credit for, but will want to follow up in 10 days. If you see anything unusual, you call us immediately. James said something. Grace didn't hear it. Her eyes were on Joy, still squirming on the table, small fists punching the air. Adiola lifted her and placed her in Grace's arms. The sound Grace made was not quiet. It came from somewhere beneath language, a broken, heaving release that shook her shoulders and compressed her whole body inward around Joy. She pressed her lips to her daughter's head and the weeping took over completely, loud and unashamed, the sound of someone returning from somewhere no one should have to go. James folded around them both. His hand cupped the back of Grace's head. He said nothing, which was the right thing. Mr. Obi wrote in his clipboard, giving them a full minute before he spoke. We'll have follow-up support arranged, a counselor assigned to the family, a case officer who'll keep you updated as the criminal proceedings move forward. His voice was measured, practiced in the specific gravity of rooms like this one. Both Ikechukwu Dike and Francis Nwosu will face charges. The documentation from tonight is comprehensive. James nodded over Grace's shoulder. The door opened. Ada came through without being invited, still in yesterday's clothes, her makeup long gone and her eyes already full before she'd crossed the threshold. She crossed the room and wrapped both arms around Grace from behind, her chin dropping to Grace's shoulder. Nay. Her voice cracked. She's here. She's fine. Grace turned just enough to press her forehead against Ada's, Joy sandwiched safe between them. Adiola stepped back to her chart. Mr. Obi moved to a chair. The social machinery of the room continued its rotation, documentation, procedure, the clean mechanics of institutional care, while at its center Grace stood holding Joy against her chest, lips moving in low eyebow, something between prayer and promise. James stood slightly behind and to the side of both women, watching the door. The courthouse smelled of old wood and floor polish, and the public gallery was packed by the time the judge took her seat. Grace and James sat in the front row, Joy with Ada back at the firm. Francis's trial ran first. His defense attorney, a thin man who sweated through his collar, built the mitigation carefully, decades of service, professional displacement, a moment of terrible judgment driven by jealousy and not genuine malice. He used the phrase not intended to cause actual harm 3 times. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, let him finish. Then she removed the glasses. Mr. Nwosu. Her voice carried to the back wall without effort. The court has heard your counsel's framing of this as a workplace grievance that escaped your control. The court does not accept that framing. She set the glasses on the bench. You provided the location of the child, you provided the routine, you provided the access. That an infant was removed from her mother's arms is a direct consequence of information you furnished. Intention does not erase consequence. Grievance does not excuse conspiracy. Francis stood very still at the dock. 7 years, kidnapping, conspiracy, and child endangerment. The sentence is concurrent across charges and is not subject to early review on grounds of professional character. The murmur in the gallery rose and settled. Kakuku's proceeding was shorter. His record spoke before his attorney could. 2 prior convictions for coercion and extortion, 1 for assault. The prosecution presented Musa's documentation, the footage, the van registration, the warehouse, and the defense offered nothing that moved the needle. The judge read his sentence with the same flat finality, 10 years. The gallery stirred again, louder this time. Grace kept her hands folded in her lap throughout, her posture straight, her face composed into something that had cost her a great deal to construct. James sat close enough that their arms touched. He didn't reach for her hand, he didn't need to. When the officers moved Francis from the dock toward the side exit, he turned. The eye contact was brief and entirely deliberate. His jaw was set. There was nothing in his expression that resembled remorse, only the compressed, calcified look of a man who had decided, somewhere in the logic of his own story, that he was the one who had been wronged, even here, even now. Grace held his gaze. She didn't shift in her seat, didn't blink early, didn't give him the satisfaction of any readable emotion. The woman who had sat against a wall counting coins and whispering accounting formulas to herself was still in there, but she was no longer the most visible thing. What sat in that front row was something else, tested in ways Francis had engineered and survived in ways he hadn't anticipated. He looked away first. The officers moved him through the door. Inspector Musa, standing along the side wall in his plain jacket, caught Grace's eye across the room. He gave a single nod, measured, unhurried, the acknowledgement of a man who had done the work he was asked to do and seen it through to its proper end. Then he turned and walked out with the quiet authority of someone who had another case waiting. James exhaled slowly beside her. The Joy Garden was smaller than its name suggested, an enclosed lawn hemmed by old trees, lit by afternoon sun filtered through white linen canopies. White chairs filled in neat rows, dressed with baby's breath and yellow roses on every aisle post. The scent was clean and faintly sweet, cut through with warm air that moved the canopy edges without disturbing them. Grace stood at the entrance to the aisle. Her dress was simple-fitted ivory with modest sleeves, a gentle flare at the hem. The headscarf was ivory too, embroidered at the edges, set with the same quiet care she brought to everything. No excess, nothing performative. She looked the way she had always been when the hardship was stripped away, precise, dignified, luminous. James waited at the end of the pale green aisle, gray suit pressed clean, the kind of stillness in his face that wasn't suppression but arrival. Like a man who had finally stopped moving toward something and was now standing in it. The pastor, a compact, soft-spoken man who wore his collar like it was earned, opened the ceremony by acknowledging plainly what the gathering already knew. "This is not only a wedding," he said, "it is a testimony. We are here because 2 people chose to see clearly when the world made it convenient to look away." Ada sat in the front row with Joy against her chest, the baby dressed in white cotton that pooled over Ada's lap. Joy's fist was curled near her own chin. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in the light and the sound without complaint. The vows were not long. James held Grace's hands loosely, thumbs resting against her knuckles, and spoke without notes. "I see you, Grace Nekaobi. I have always seen you, your brilliance, your strength, your unbreakable spirit. I promise to continue to see you, to honor you, and to stand beside you as we build our life together. I will protect you and our daughter not because you cannot protect yourself, but because love means choosing to stand together, always." A woman in the third row pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Someone coughed. The garden held its collective breath. Grace looked at James and let the stillness settle before she spoke. "I came to you thinking I had lost everything. You showed me that I still had my mind, my skill, and my capacity to love." Her voice was steady. Not practiced, steady, genuinely so, the way only hard-won things can sound. I promise to honor the trust you have placed in me, to remain truthful and steadfast, and to build with you a life that honors where I have come from and celebrates where I am going. You did not save me, you recognized that I was never lost. Thank you for seeing me. James slid the ring onto her finger. Grace slid his onto his. The pastor said what pastors say, and when James kissed Grace, the garden erupted applause, ululation from the Igbo side, a long, joyful shout from one of James's Yoruba cousins that made several guests laugh before they had finished clapping. Ada rose and carried Joy forward. James took his daughter into his arms without ceremony, just shifting her weight from Ada's hold into his own, adjusting her so she faced outward toward the guests. Joy blinked at the light. The three of them stood together at the end of the aisle, Grace's hand resting on Joy's back, James solid beside her, and the applause held. At the reception, long tables replaced the ceremony rows. Jollof rice and suya, fried plantain, and terrine of iriwadabu that Grace's aunt had made and carried from Enugu. Drummers from James's family set the Yoruba beat, while an Igbo choir did the offertory. Nobody had planned the overlap. It worked anyway. Ada's toast was short. I have watched this woman walk into a building with nothing but a business card and a textbook. She raised her glass toward Grace. Everything since then has been exactly who she already was. Inspector Musa stood near the tree line with a plate of food and a glass of water, watching the tables. He had come in plain clothes, dark trousers, a good jacket, off duty. He watched Ada sit back down to laughter, watched James feed Joy a sip of water from a spoon, watched Grace throw her head back at something her aunt said. He set his plate down and applauded with the rest of them. The nursery smelled of shea butter and talcum powder. Pale yellow walls, soft green curtains, and a shelf of photographs that traced a year in small frames. Joy in the hospital, Joy at the wedding in Ada's arms, Joy at her naming ceremony with Grace's father holding her like something sacred. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor mat, Joy wedged into her lap, the picture book open across both their legs. Joy was past sitting still for entire stories, but she liked the ones with animals, and she liked Grace's voice, and for now that was enough. Elephant, Grace said, pointing. Eh. Joy tapped the page hard with her whole palm. Close enough. The flat had grown since that first sparse space James had arranged. Walls knocked through, rooms added, a proper kitchen that Grace's aunt had blessed with 3 pots of soup on the first evening she visited. The study down the hall held a desk and a filing cabinet and, on the shelf above them, advanced accounting principles, its spine cracked and the cover soft from years of handling. It sat between 2 folders labeled Zenith Minerals Resolid and Crescent and Crown Ethical Conduct Framework Year 1. The second was Ada's work, formally adopted by the board in March. James came in without announcing himself. He leaned in the doorway, jacket off, top button undone, the version of him the office didn't get. He watched Grace point to a giraffe and watched Joy ignore the giraffe entirely in favor of attempting to turn 3 pages at once. He came and sat beside them on the mat, and Joy immediately transferred herself into his lap and continued her assault on the book from there. Grace let the page rest. I used to think dignity came from what others saw in you. She wasn't looking at James when she said it, she was watching Joy bend the book at an angle that was not good for the spine. Now I know it comes from what you know to be true about yourself, and from having people around you who see and honor that truth. A pause. I'm grateful for you, for Joy, for Ada and the firm and what we're building, the scholarship fund, my parents calling again. All of it. James shifted Joy's weight gently, keeping her from toppling sideways. You've changed my life as much as I've changed yours, he said. That's the part people don't say plainly enough. They tell your story like you came in needing to be fixed. You came in with everything, the mind, the discipline, the refusal to disappear. He turned to look at her. We built this together. Joy, bored with the book, reached up and closed it with finality. Then she turned and grabbed one of Grace's fingers and one of James's, and sat there holding both, studying the window where the late afternoon light was coming in thick and amber through the curtains. Grace's hand was warm, James's was steady, Joy's was small, and her grip was absolute.